Hey guys, tonight we drift into the soft, dim edges of prehistory, where the world around you hums with the quiet of places that no one has named yet. You walk across a landscape where the air tastes a little like wood smoke and damp earth, and the horizon bends gently into a sky untouched by city lights. You're about to slip into tens of thousands of years of human memory, though to be totally honest, you probably won't survive this era unless you're extremely good at avoiding large animals with pointy teeth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, as always, I'd love to know where you are and what time it is for you right now, so drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a prehistoric path, the ground uneven beneath your bare feet. Everything is quieter than the modern world you know. No buzzing neon signs, no distant hum of traffic. Instead, you hear the occasional rustle of tall grasses, the clicking of stones shifting under your steps, and the rhythmic breathing of people moving together as a small group. It's your traveling band of early humans. They keep close because safety, warmth, and survival all depend on staying within arm's reach of one another. Somewhere inside this small community is a child or adult who, if born today, would be recognized as having Down syndrome. You won't hear the term, of course. There are no medical labels yet, no textbooks, no diagnoses. What you witness instead is how people respond to one another purely through lived experience, body language, daily patterns, shared tasks, and the understanding that every pair of hands contributes something. A mainstream historical fact for you: archaeologists have actually found remains from as early as 15,000 years ago that appear to belong to individuals with characteristics consistent with Down syndrome. One of the most notable discoveries came from a burial in France, where the child was not only buried with care, but placed in the same ceremonial position as others. You kneel beside the spot, brushing away a layer of imaginary soil, feeling the weight of that simple human gesture. Someone loved and protected this child long enough for them to live past infancy, which would have required constant attention in a world that offered absolutely zero room for medical error. And yes, because this is bedtime history, your mind drifts to a small, almost comedic moment. You picture some prehistoric parent reminding their rambunctious toddler not to chew on rocks, because even in the Ice Age, toddlers probably tried to eat everything. That's your first light joke. Feel free to chuckle softly, you won't wake anyone. You keep moving through the settlement, and you notice that early human life leaves almost no space for isolation. Everyone sleeps together, eats together, keeps watch together. If one person wakes up in the middle of the night, everyone does. Not exactly the best setup for deep REM sleep, but great for building bonds. In that closeness, someone with cognitive differences would have been known deeply. Every gesture, every expression, every habit. Historians still argue whether early societies viewed disability through a lens of burden or through one of shared survival. And honestly, the truth may be somewhere in the murky middle ground. But examples of long-term survival suggest that many groups instinctively protected members who needed extra help. You can almost see it now. Someone offering a hand to help the young person over a log. Someone guiding them toward the safest route. Someone giving them tasks suited to their pace. And here's a quirky tidbit. Prehistoric people sometimes used red ochre to paint bodies during rituals or burials. So somewhere out there in those ancient millennia, some caretaker might have gently brushed warm, clay-like pigment across a child's cheeks during a ceremony, honoring them as part of the group. You imagine the pigment smudging onto the caretaker's hands, leaving marks that they didn't bother to wash off until the next river bath, because personal hygiene in prehistory was very flexible. You move closer to the hearth, where the clan gathers. The fire crackles softly, sparks spiraling upward like tiny glowing insects. The group shares roasted roots, dried berries, maybe a sliver of meat if the hunting was good. The air is warm, smoky, almost hypnotic. You notice how tasks are divided gently, not with rigid rules, but with practicality. Someone with slower cognitive processing might be given smaller but meaningful jobs, sorting stones, turning hides, carrying embers in a fire-safe bowl lined with clay. You watch a pair of hands carefully tending the fire, and you feel how easy it is for routines to become comforting, grounding, and essential. As you sit down beside them, you feel the heat soak into your legs. You inhale deeply, the earthy scent settling into your lungs. This is a moment where the whole group simply exists. No hierarchy, no paperwork, no labels, just survival together. Another joke drifts through your mind, because again, bedtime history doesn't have to take itself too seriously. Imagine trying to explain to these early humans that one day people will argue online about how to pronounce Neanderthal. You can picture one of them raising an eyebrow at you, probably thinking, "You guys get into fights about sounds?" Your walk continues toward a small shelter formed by mammoth bones and animal hides. You brush your fingers across the smooth inner curve of a massive femur, appreciating how early humans used every scrap they could find. Inside the dwelling, you see signs of adaptation. Soft bedding made of grasses, perhaps arranged to make sure a child sleeps close to warmth. A designated spot where someone sits during group activities, maybe even rhythmic songs used to soothe children at night. The idea that people with Down syndrome were cared for as valued members isn't a modern romantic fantasy. It's supported by patterns of survival and burial. You step back outside, letting the cool night air wrap around you. The stars spill across the sky in thick, luminous bands, far brighter than anything you've seen in your modern urban life. The prehistoric world wasn't just tough, it was beautiful. And caring for someone with special needs didn't diminish that world. If anything, it heightened the tenderness in the group. A third gentle joke slips into your mind. Imagine someone in the camp inventing the first "I'm too tired for this" eye roll when dealing with a stubborn sibling. You know that look. It has survived 15,000 years unchanged. Before long, you realize that the story of disability in prehistory isn't a tale of pity or tragedy. It's a story of humans being incredibly human, improvising, adapting, and forming small circles of care. The archaeological evidence doesn't show exclusion, it shows community. It shows that people made space for each other long before anyone wrote moral codes or medical handbooks. As you step further from the firelight, your eyes adjust to the dark once more. You can hear the occasional distant howl of something that probably wants to eat you. You take that as your signal to wander gently into the next stretch of this long, drowsy journey, carrying with you the warmth of the hearth and the quiet truth that care has always existed, even in the earliest chapters of our shared story. You move forward from the flickering warmth of the prehistoric hearth until the air shifts just slightly, as if time itself exhales. The ground beneath your feet becomes firmer, more settled, and the world around you takes on shapes that feel familiar in a distant, ancestral way. You're still surrounded by early people, but now they bury their dead with intention, with patterns, with stories etched into the soil. You step into ancient burial grounds where silence feels almost sacred. The air is cool and still, as if someone draped an invisible blanket over the landscape. You're not afraid, though. This is the kind of quiet that hums with gentle respect, not dread. You find yourself near a small cluster of graves, shallow enough to remind you that the tools used to dig them weren't metal, but stone, wood, maybe even antler. Kneeling in the soft earth, you brush your fingers across the outline of a burial pit. The soil is layered like a slow, dusty history book, each stratum a different memory. Here, you discover one of the earliest known archaeological clues about a person who lived with what we would today recognize as Down syndrome. One mainstream historical fact drifts in on the evening breeze. In 2020, researchers announced the discovery of an infant buried 6,000 years ago in Spain, whose skull showed clear characteristics consistent with Down syndrome. And, this is the part that matters, the child lived long enough to develop teeth and show signs of ongoing care. Someone fed them, held them, carried them. Someone chose to place them carefully in the grave with cultural rituals similar to those used for everyone else. You lean closer, Imagining the burial process. A quiet morning, a family gathered, maybe the sound of wind moving through reeds. No medical jargon, no diagnosis, just grief, tenderness, and the simple truth that this child belonged. A small, quirky detail floats into your mind. Some ancient communities decorated graves with shells, but not always matching shells. Sometimes they mixed species, sizes, shapes, almost like prehistoric folk art using whatever the tide tossed their way. Picture a parent gently arranging mismatched clam and snail shells around a baby, whispering something soft, and absolutely not stressing about color coordination like a modern Pinterest board. That's your first light joke of this section. Even ancient burials had their version of good enough craft day, which is comforting in its own low-key way. As you stand, you notice another grave farther off, marked by stones arranged in a careful semicircle. You approach it slowly. The stones cast small shadows, thin, gentle strokes across the dusty ground. Here lies the famous Mesolithic burial from France, discovered decades ago, where a child with cranial features consistent with Down syndrome lived to several years of age. The survival alone tells you everything. Someone took the time to feed the child, protect them, carry them, include them in seasonal migrations, and help them endure illness or cold nights. Historians still argue whether such burials reflect spiritual beliefs, family loyalty, or simply the practical bonds forged by small nomadic groups, but what they agree on is this: the level of care demonstrated was significant and sustained. You sit beside the grave, feeling the weight of that truth. Every ancient burial is a moment frozen in time, a message whispered across thousands of years. And this message is not one of rejection, but of belonging. You walk through the burial field, feeling the soil soften under your steps. The world here is transitioning. Human societies are growing more complex. You see early farming communities on distant hills, smoke rising from permanent hearths, people learning the rhythms of planting and harvesting. With stability comes ritual, and with ritual comes symbolic care for the dead. A second light joke pops into your thoughts as a tiny lizard scurries across your path. Somewhere in the Neolithic era, some poor kid probably tripped during a burial ceremony and dropped a ceremonial object into the grave by accident. Maybe a sibling rolled their eyes at them. Congratulations, that's the oldest known version of "you had one job." You walk toward another part of the site. This one feels more organized, almost geometric, graves arranged in lines. You imagine early communities developing traditions, burying loved ones with food, beads, tools, or figurines. Some of these items were purely symbolic. Others were practical tokens meant to accompany the individual into whatever afterlife people imagined. As you move through the field, you realize the most remarkable pattern. Burials of people with visible differences, including those consistent with Down syndrome, do not sit in isolated corners. They aren't hidden or separated. They rest alongside everyone else. That placement speaks louder than any written record. You pause at the entrance to a reconstructed longhouse where a burial once lay beneath the floor. This was a common practice in some Neolithic cultures. Ancestors weren't buried in distant cemeteries. They were beneath the very homes where families slept. If someone with Down syndrome was buried inside a house, it means they were considered family, literally placed among the living even in death. Another quirky fragment of archaeology slips in. Some early European communities buried people with odd arrangements of hands or feet, arms folded in unusual positions, or bodies dusted with powdered red ochre. These positions weren't consistent with disability, they were ritual. In other words, the physical differences of the person were not what shaped the burial, the tradition did. You lean against a large mossy stone. The air smells faintly of grass and dry leaves. A breeze rustles through the trees, soft enough to make you sleepy. All around you are echoes of care, even if no one carved anything in stone to explain it. You imagine how daily life might have gone. Someone with slower motor skills might stay close to home during dangerous tasks. They may have sat near the fire, helping weave baskets, or crack nuts, or watch younger children. Early farming villages relied on repetitive work, quiet work, patient work, the kind that doesn't require fast reactions or abstract reasoning. Perfectly suited roles existed long before modern society complicated everything with job descriptions and performance reviews. Your third light joke arrives gently. Picture a Neolithic supervisor giving performance feedback. Your basket weaving has shown significant improvement, but please stop feeding the goats fermented berries. You smile as you step through a patch of sunlight warming the grass. As you leave the burial grounds, the sky begins to warm with early dawn light. The past seems to stretch behind you like a long, soft blanket. You carry with you the understanding that the earliest burials don't reflect exclusion or fear of difference. They reflect love, ritual, and the universal desire to remember those we lose. You take one last look at the graves, quiet shapes and quiet earth, and continue your slow walk forward into the next chapter of human history. You walk onward until the landscape shifts beneath your feet again. This time, the world feels more structured, more bustling, and honestly, slightly more talkative. You've stepped into the classical world, where Greek philosophers pace in sandals that absolutely were not designed for arch support, Roman merchants haggle over prices with the enthusiasm of modern coupon warriors, and ideas about human difference start weaving themselves into written philosophy, myth, and daily practice. You move through an ancient Greek polis first. The stone streets are warm beneath your steps, the air thick with olive trees, sea breeze, and the faint whiff of fish that someone really should have cooked earlier in the day. People shout greetings across the agora, sellers wave bunches of herbs at you, and somewhere far off, a storyteller tries to convince passersby that he once outran a satyr. You nod politely. You don't believe him either. In this lively space, you observe how the Greeks perceived difference: physical, cognitive, emotional. Greek medical writers like Hippocrates never described Down syndrome specifically, but they did note variations in growth, facial features, and development. A mainstream historical fact floats into your ear like a soft whisper. Ancient physicians recognized that some children developed more slowly than others and needed more support, even if they didn't categorize conditions the way we do today. You see a family moving together through the crowded marketplace. Amid the chaos, there's a young person whose pace is slower, their movements slightly gentler. But their family stays close, they hold a hand, they guide through tight spaces, they shield from the loudest shouts. In this world, care isn't institutional or medicalized, it's simply woven into household responsibility. You trail them into a shaded courtyard where women grind grain and gossip with the efficiency of experts. If you stay long enough, you realize, and here's your first light joke, Greek gossip spreads faster than Wi-Fi. Those courtyard conversations were basically the original social media. You notice how daily life creates rhythms that might suit someone with cognitive differences. Tasks like sorting olives, carrying water in small jars, tending to animals that don't run very far. Yes, you, chicken, offer ways to participate without being overwhelmed. Ancient households depended on division of labor, and roles were flexible. The expectation wasn't perfection, it was contribution. As you move past the courtyard, you step into the gymnasium, though thankfully no one asks you to join a wrestling match. You'd lose, badly. Here, ideas about the ideal human were cultivated, which makes you pause. This was also a society that admired symmetry, strength, and sharp intellect. But contrary to popular assumptions, the Greeks didn't banish people who didn't fit the aesthetic. In fact, many city-states took responsibility for citizens who struggled to support themselves. Athens, for example, had state-funded assistance for people with disabilities, an early form of social welfare. Historians still argue whether these programs represented genuine compassion or simply civic strategy to maintain social order. But either way, the system allowed vulnerable individuals to receive food, shelter, and basic security. You wander now toward a small temple nestled along the hillside. The breeze cools your skin, and the cicadas drone like tiny, determined alarm clocks. Here, spiritual interpretations come into play. Some Greeks believed that physical differences were signs from the gods, sometimes omens, sometimes blessings. Others saw them as part of life's natural variety. It depended on the region, the era, and the local priest who might have had, let's say, creative interpretive skills. A quirky detail emerges: certain sanctuaries, like those dedicated to Asclepius, encouraged families to bring sick or disabled loved ones to sleep overnight in the hope of receiving healing dreams from the god. You can picture an entire room full of people trying to sleep on stone benches while snakes, the sacred symbol of the healing god, slithered freely around them. Yes, real snakes. And yes, that's your second light joke. Relax, the snakes are just part of the therapy. Ancient Greek healthcare really took natural remedies to a bold level. Now, time pushes you gently toward Rome, where the streets take on a different kind of energy, louder, more structured, more empire-ish. Romans loved order. They loved lists. They loved telling everyone how orderly and listed their empire was. But beneath that administrative enthusiasm lay a deeply pragmatic society where family, familia, was the center of life. You walk into a Roman domus where the floor mosaics feel cool under your toes. Inside, members of extended households move around each other like a slow, efficient dance. If a child or adult had developmental differences, responsibility for their care typically stayed with the family. Roman law even specified guardianship structures for people considered unable to manage property or complex decisions. It wasn't a moral judgment so much as a legal category. And here comes your third gentle joke. Roman legal texts were so detailed that if you sneezed wrong, there was probably a clause about it. You imagine a senator arguing passionately about cough-related jurisprudence. As you step into the garden courtyard, you notice a young person sitting in a shaded corner weaving small flower crowns. Their movements are slow but intentional. A relative sits beside them, offering gentle guidance without hovering. This isn't fantasy. Archaeological evidence from burial goods and household remains suggests that people with cognitive differences lived within families, contributed tasks suited to their abilities, and were integrated into the rhythms of life. You wander down a busy Roman street now. Vendors call out. The smell of fresh bread promises comfort, while the smell of the fish market promises exactly nothing good. You pass a small workshop where artisans make tiles, some simple, repetitive tasks perfect for steady hands and patient focus. Inclusion didn't require philosophical debate. It emerged from daily practicality. Of course, the classical world wasn't uniformly compassionate. Some philosophers wrote unkindly about disability. Some laws were harsh. Some families struggled. Care depended heavily on household attitudes. But the archaeological and textual evidence shows that people with traits consistent with Down syndrome lived within communities, were buried with honor, and contributed in quiet ways to the life around them. You step now toward the edge of the city, where a simple grave sits beneath a cypress tree. The inscription isn't elaborate, but the placement and offerings, small pottery pieces, coins, flowers, tell you something unmistakable. This person mattered. The Romans didn't bury individuals separately unless they were criminals or outcasts. This grave is among others in the warmth of community earth. You inhale the pine-scented air, letting it settle into you. You feel the hum of life and history blending. The classical world wasn't perfect, far from it, but it offers glimpses of continuity. Families caring, communities adjusting, people making space for difference long before modern frameworks existed. The sun dips behind the hills, washing the stone buildings in soft amber light. You take a final look at the agora, the temple, the domus, the quiet grave beneath the cypress. Then, slowly, you step away, the sounds of ancient conversations fading behind you as you move forward into the next era, still carrying the sense that humanity's earliest instinct wasn't exclusion, but connection. You step forward again, letting the warmth of the classical sun fade behind you until the air cools into something quieter, older, and a little more mysterious. You've arrived in a time when people explained the world not with science textbooks or medical charts, but with stories, symbols, and rituals that shimmered somewhere between fear and comfort. Here, disability isn't just a physical or cognitive state, it's interpreted through sacred lenses, superstitions, and the shared beliefs that shaped whole communities. You walk into a landscape dotted with shrines, small altars, and half-forgotten offerings. The smoke of incense curls upward like a sleepy ribbon. You hear soft murmurs of prayers in dozens of dialects, all threaded together by the universal human need to make sense of anything that feels unusual or fragile. Somewhere in this ancient tapestry of belief, a child or adult with Down syndrome lives within a community, but the meaning of their difference depends heavily on the stories people tell. You begin in a small household. The smell of warm bread drifts from the doorway, mingling with the faint musk of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A grandmother sits weaving, while periodically glancing at a child nearby who moves more slowly, humming softly as they sort beans into a carved wooden bowl. In many ancient cultures, such differences weren't necessarily medical mysteries, they were interpreted as spiritual signs. In multiple ancient societies, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Celtic, physical or cognitive differences were sometimes associated with divine favor or special spiritual insight. Not always, and not everywhere, but often enough that the pattern stands out. Priests, shamans, and healers paid attention to unusual traits, interpreting them through whatever symbolic system their culture used. As you step farther into this household, you notice charms hanging from the ceiling, little clay figurines, woven knots, bits of colored thread. The family believes these protect the child from ill intentions or wandering spirits. Some charms look surprisingly like modern dream catchers, though theirs are probably less aesthetic Etsy decor and more please don't bring bad luck. You smile at the quirky tidbit that floats into your mind. In certain ancient European households, people hung garlic at the door not just to repel spirits, but because they believed strong smells distracted mischievous entities. Imagine telling a ghost, "Hang on, I'm protected because my kitchen smells like an over-enthusiastic pizzeria." That's your first light joke for the section. Ancient spiritual protection apparently doubled as a seasoning strategy. You move on into a wider community, where religious festivals color the entire rhythm of life. Drums thump, dancers swirl, offerings pile high around statues. In this swirl of devotion, people with cognitive differences participate too, each according to their comfort. Some sit calmly at the sidelines. Others join simple ritual tasks, carrying candles, sweeping petals, keeping lanterns lit. In some regions, such as parts of the ancient Near East, families believed that children born with unusual features had a connection to protective spirits or ancestors. This didn't guarantee a life free of challenges. Superstitions ran the full spectrum, from comforting to downright stressful. But it often meant that the child was watched closely, protected, and folded into ritual life. You pass under an arch where the walls are covered in painted symbols: eyes to ward off envy, spirals for protection, birds for guidance. People believed these symbols shielded those who were vulnerable. And in a world without modern medicine, families used whatever metaphors they had to explain vulnerability. Historians still argue whether widespread spiritual interpretations helped or hindered inclusion. Some scholars think they offered a protective narrative. Others think they fueled superstition-based fears. The truth, like most ancient stories, probably braided both strands together. You walk toward a small healing shrine on the hillside. The sun is warm on your shoulders, and the scent of herbs hangs thick in the air. Sage, thyme, maybe something that resembles ancient proto-mint. A healer sits by the doorway grinding leaves into a paste. Families come seeking remedies, prayers, or simply reassurance. The healer welcomes those with developmental differences without hesitation. They might not understand chromosomes, but they understand humanity. They observe, listen, and offer rituals meant to soothe. Gentle touches, whispered invocations, herb smoke wafted around the body. Another light joke slips into your mind. Ancient healers probably had the same energy as modern wellness influencers, except instead of selling you essential oils online, they just burned them in front of you while chanting. Buy my ritual smoke wasn't a thing yet, thankfully. Inside the shrine, you notice drawings, simple figures painted on clay tablets. One drawing shows a caregiver holding a child close. Another shows a community dancing together. These images aren't idealized, they're snapshots of daily life. Someone with Down syndrome would have been part of these scenes, their presence woven into the fabric of rituals. You continue down the path toward a village gathering place. People meet at night to share stories. And tonight's story wielder is a man with an impressively dramatic cloak, far too warm for the season. He recounts a tale about a child touched by the gods, one who grows into a gentle protector of their village. It's not a story about Down syndrome specifically. Ancient stories rarely described specific conditions, but it reflects the archetype of the gentle, wise, or spiritually gifted child whose difference made them special rather than ostracized. You sit for a while, letting the firelight flicker over your face. Someone hands you a small cup of something warm that tastes vaguely like honey, smoke, and questionable fermentation choices. You nod politely while contemplating your health. Another quirky detail drifts by. In some Celtic traditions, people placed carved wooden figures under beds to ward off nightly mischief that could disturb those deemed spiritually delicate. Wooden figurines as supernatural security guards, truly an ancient version of a nightlight. You watch as a parent tucks a child in by the fire, murmuring protective blessings. The child's breathing slows, their eyes half closed. In this society, vulnerability isn't mocked, it's surrounded by ritual. Ritual gives structure, structure gives comfort, comfort gives protection. You step back into the night air, stars bright above you. A fox darts across your path, its fur glowing pale in the moonlight. It pauses and stares at you with the deep, judgmental intensity of an animal that absolutely knows your secrets. That's your third light joke. Even ancient foxes had opinions. The night deepens. You walk past fields where crops sway softly. You feel the undercurrent of human belief beneath your feet. Fear, hope, superstition, love. These beliefs shaped how people interpreted differences, sometimes as omens, sometimes as blessings, but always through a deeply human lens of meaning-making. The important part, the part you carry with you, is that people with traits resembling Down syndrome didn't exist outside these beliefs. They existed within them. They were part of family rituals, protected by charms, included in festivals, and gently interpreted through spiritual narratives that gave their lives shape. You let the wind brush against your face as you leave the sacred landscapes behind. Ahead lies another part of history, one where daily labor replaces ritual, where practical contributions take center stage. But in your memory remains the faint scent of incense, the flicker of candles, and the murmur of ancient prayers meant to protect those who needed it most. Imagine now that you are drifting gently into the rhythm of ancient daily labor. The sun is low, the dust is soft beneath your feet, and people across early civilizations are quietly settling into the small, steady tasks that keep a community alive. In these gentle places of work, fields, workshops, weaving rooms, storage courtyards, you begin to notice something subtle and deeply human. You see individuals with different physical features, different strengths, different ways of learning and responding to the world, quietly participating in the shared routines of life. Their roles may not be dramatic. They may not be written in royal inscriptions or celebrated in epic poems. But in the background, their presence is woven into the long tapestry of everyday labor. Because the ancient world relied so heavily on family-based work, many roles were fluid, adaptable, and forgiving. Tasks were often passed down not because someone was especially skilled, but simply because they were present. Someone's child, someone's sibling, someone who grew up near the workshop or in the courtyard. In these spaces, the concept of a job was not rigid or formalized the way it is today. Instead, work unfolded as a series of careful contributions, shaped by ability, endurance, temperament, and the slow, steady rhythms of home. Now imagine walking into a small farming settlement in ancient Anatolia. The air smells of straw and warm clay. Inside a dim storage room, you find a family sorting barley. Some people grind grain with broad, steady motions. Others tie bundles for the next day. In a corner, a young man with gentle movements and a distinctive roundness in his face carefully picks twigs and pebbles out of a basket of herbs. His task is simple, but it is essential. Contaminated herbs can spoil the medicine they will be mixed into. His mother glances over from time to time, offering a smile of reassurance. There is no hurry here. No one rushes him. The job fits his pace. It is quiet, predictable, and valued. Throughout the ancient world, many such small, slow-paced household tasks existed. Tasks that required patience more than strength, routine more than precision. These kinds of jobs often became natural spaces where people with cognitive differences might contribute comfortably. Though ancient societies did not have our modern understanding of Down syndrome or other intellectual disabilities, families often recognized the particular strengths of individuals who thrived in predictable patterns. Tasks such as sorting, weaving fringe, carrying lightweight items, watching over animals in enclosed courtyards, or assisting with repetitive preparations were common assignments. You might picture, for example, a weaving room in ancient Mesopotamia. These rooms were warm, filled with the soft clicking of wooden looms and the scent of dyed wool. Much of the work was repetitive, twisting fibers, winding threads, or preparing balls of yarn. In such environments, someone who worked best through familiar motions could find a soothing role. Even if they were not asked to complete complex patterns, their help with the preparatory steps contributed to the entire household's productivity. A mother or aunt might gently show them how to tie knots or place threads in a basket. Over time, these small tasks became part of the rhythmic life of the day. Similarly, in many ancient villages, livestock care included a surprising variety of simple duties. While herding large flocks required physical endurance and quick judgment, watching penned animals, goats, sheep, or even poultry, was often a calmer responsibility. It required awareness and consistency rather than speed. Someone with a calm temperament could excel at this. They might sit near the animals, ensure they stayed within the enclosure, or gently guide them to a feeding trough. The work was repetitive, but repetition brought comfort. It also brought a quiet place of belonging within the household economy. Consider sliding forward in time, perhaps to the Mediterranean during the classical period. You enter a pottery workshop with its earthy smell of wet clay. Here, artisans shape bowls and jars on spinning wheels. The work requires skill and precision, but the workshop is also full of secondary tasks: carrying clay, dampening the wheels, moving dried pots to shelves, smoothing small imperfections with a damp cloth. In one corner, a soft-spoken young woman patiently wipes each new vessel with gentle strokes. The potter nods approvingly. Her care helps prevent cracks during drying. This simple, steady contribution supports the entire craft. Even in larger households, estates, temples, or community kitchens, there were small responsibilities tied to preparing food. Vegetable sorting, grain cleaning, washing herbs, picking over lentils, and arranging ingredients were tasks that fit well into a world without strict industrial timing. Food preparation was long, slow, and communal. Someone who moved at a gentler pace or needed more time for instructions could still participate meaningfully. People learned by watching others, repeating motions until they became second nature. Of course, the ancient world was not uniformly gentle. There were places where differences in appearance or cognition brought judgment, confusion, or exclusion. Yet in the quieter corners of daily labor, the reality was often much simpler than the assumptions written in philosophical texts or formal laws. Families and small communities tended to value help wherever it could be found. Work was not about profit margins or competing markets. It was about survival, cooperation, and routine. Therefore, many households naturally adjusted tasks to match the abilities of each member. Imagine now walking through ancient China during the Zhou or Han period. In a courtyard workshop surrounded by bamboo scaffolding, workers craft simple wooden tools. The tasks vary: shaping handles, smoothing surfaces, bundling items for storage. You notice an older man who moves slowly, with a gentle, measured rhythm. His face carries the characteristic gentleness associated today with Down syndrome. He is entrusted with oiling the finished wooden pieces, rubbing them until they shine softly. His role requires care rather than speed, and his contributions are quietly respected. His coworkers have known him since childhood. They do not measure his worth by complexity of skill, but by reliability and presence. In many places, these roles were not only practical, but also deeply relational. A person's place within work was tied to their place within a household. When someone contributed, even in small ways, the family saw them as helpful, connected, and valued. They were not expected to be independent in a modern sense. Instead, life was interdependent. Work, rest, and care existed in overlapping circles. You might picture ancient marketplaces where small businesses developed: spice stalls, bread sellers, pottery booths. A person with cognitive differences might sit with a parent or sibling, helping to arrange items, hand over small objects, or watch the stall when traffic was light. The marketplace was noisy, yes, but the work itself often included many moments of calm observation. Even in religious settings, small roles existed. Shrines and temples required constant maintenance: trimming lamps, carrying offerings, sweeping courtyards, arranging flowers. In some communities, individuals who needed structure or routine found peace in such repeated sacred duties. While higher ceremonial roles were reserved for trained priests, everyday upkeep often relied on ordinary people who simply knew the space well and moved comfortably within it. As you continue your quiet walk through these ancient workplaces, perhaps you begin to notice a unifying theme. Across cultures and centuries, human communities rarely functioned through a strict division of labor based on intellectual demand. Instead, they worked through layers of interwoven tasks, many of them small, steady, and forgiving. This created openings, sometimes subtle, sometimes intentional, for people who learned differently or moved at a gentler rhythm. And so, as the day in your imagined journey comes to a close, you see these individuals settling back into the soft glow of their households. The tools are put away, the animals fed, the hearth fires lit. The contributions they've made, though simple, are woven into the quiet story of human survival. Their presence softened the edges of ancient labor, adding a layer of patience to the rhythms of work. In this peaceful twilight of ancient time, you remember that productivity in the past was not merely about efficiency. It was about togetherness, continuity, and shared responsibility. Within these calm, repetitive, essential tasks, people with cognitive differences found spaces of dignity. Their role was not defined by a label, for no such label existed. Their value was held in the warmth of family bonds, the familiarity of routines, and the quiet trust placed in their hands. And as the stars rise over the old world, you recognize that these humble contributions, scattered across countless centuries, form one of the softest, most enduring threads in the long history of human care. Now let your mind drift into the quieter chambers of the ancient world, where early healers, scribes, and thinkers began to wonder about the mysteries of the human body. These were not doctors in the modern sense: no white coats, no laboratories, no microscopes humming with electricity. Instead, these were observers of life, men and women who watched their neighbors, their families, their communities with thoughtful care. They lived in a world illuminated by firelight, shaped by clay tablets and reed pens, punctuated by rituals, charms, and whispered theories. And within this environment, they began forming the earliest written reflections on bodies that appeared or behaved differently from the typical pattern. As you enter this gentle landscape, imagine yourself stepping into an ancient Egyptian healing house. The air smells of resin, old papyrus, and crushed herbs that hang from the rafters. Scribes sit on stone benches, writing down remedies and observations, while healers move quietly among their patients. Their records are practical, descriptive, rooted in what they could see, touch, and smell. They wrote, for example, about swollen limbs, fevers, persistent coughs, and injuries. When they noticed babies born with unusual features, they described what they saw plainly: rounded faces, small statures, eyes shaped a little differently, without attaching the labels or theories we have today. To these early practitioners, a visible difference in appearance or development was part of the tapestry of human variation. They often linked such differences to spiritual or supernatural causes, but their writings show something more nuanced than simple superstition. Many of their texts reveal empathy, an effort to understand rather than condemn. They focused on comfort and practical care, soothing aches with oils, calming agitation with herbs, and observing patterns in a patient's behavior. While not every healer showed compassion, many were motivated by curiosity and a desire to ease suffering. Move forward now, slowly, into ancient Mesopotamia, the land of clay tablets, star charts, and some of the earliest clinical notes. Here, too, healers observed bodily differences with careful attention. They recorded signs and symptoms not as judgments but as clues. Their world was shaped by divination and omen interpretation, yet within these traditions they showed keen observational skill. In one dimly lit room, you imagine a healer sitting beside a child who learns more slowly than others. The healer strokes his beard thoughtfully, noting the child's gentle demeanor and slower movements. He writes a few lines onto a clay tablet, not diagnosing in the way a modern doctor would, but describing what he sees, perhaps linking the child's temperament to certain stars or omens. Though these interpretations are not scientifically accurate, they reveal something very human, an attempt to find meaning, to explain difference in a world where knowledge was scarce and uncertainty was constant. In many ancient societies, physical differences were also interpreted through the lens of religion. Temples were not only places of worship, but centers of healing. Priests acted as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual realms. When a baby was born with traits they didn't understand, families often brought the child to a temple for guidance. The priests might have seen these traits as signs, some auspicious, some simply unusual, others misunderstood. But often there was a sense of seeking protection, seeking understanding. The child was enveloped in ritual rather than rejection. Now drift further west, into the world of ancient Greece, the birthplace of philosophical medicine. Here, the curiosity of healers deepened into early scientific inquiry. The Greeks were some of the first to attempt explanations based not only on divine forces, but on natural causes. Hippocrates and his followers wrote about the balance of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile as the key to understanding health. They observed people whose minds worked differently, who needed more time to speak or learn, who possessed distinctive facial features that stood out gently from the norm. Their explanations, though inaccurate, were rooted in the belief that everything had a natural cause. A person with cognitive differences might be described as having an imbalance of humors, or having been shaped by environmental conditions during development. The language could be clinical, sometimes impersonal, but it was also free from mysticism. For these early Greek physicians, to observe patiently was a form of respect. And yet even here, there was a quiet limit to their understanding. Without tools to look inside the body, without knowledge of chromosomes or genetics, they could only speculate. But speculation, when grounded in observation, was a step toward progress. Their writings, however incomplete, show humanity's first attempts to classify developmental differences as part of the natural world rather than the supernatural. As you walk through these ancient Greek healing spaces in your imagination, hear the soft scratching of a stylus across a wax tablet. Picture a physician sitting with a family whose child does not speak clearly and often repeats the same actions. The physician listens, not rushing, not dismissing, simply observing. He notes that the child is calm, not disruptive, and suggests routines that might help him thrive. These recommendations are simple: predictable schedules, gentle environments, repetitive learning. Though centuries old, they echo modern strategies. Now drift gently into the Roman world, where medicine blended Greek theories with practical engineering and public health. Roman physicians, like their predecessors, noticed developmental differences and attempted explanations. Their writings mention children who grew more slowly, spoke later, or had characteristic facial features. They recorded treatments, some based on herbs, others on dietary changes, others simply on increased supervision. These treatments may not have been effective, but the act of recording them shows ongoing curiosity. Roman midwives and older women, deeply experienced in childbirth and early care, also left traces of their observations. Though their knowledge rarely made it into formal medical texts, their hands-on guidance shaped family practices. A midwife might advise a mother to speak softly to a child who seemed easily overwhelmed, or to use repetitive rhythms to soothe a child who struggled with transitions. These were early versions of sensory support, grounded in love rather than theory. Move eastward again, traveling in your imagination to ancient India and the traditions of Ayurveda. Ayurvedic texts also describe differences in development, noting variations in cognition, temperament, and physical appearance. Their explanations drew on the concept of doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, and the idea that imbalance created differences in growth and behavior. Though the framework was symbolic, the attention to gentle support was real. Families were encouraged to create calm environments, use soothing oils, offer structured routines, and provide comforting sounds. Once again, you see an ancient echo of approaches modern caregivers use instinctively. As you continue drifting across ancient landscapes, you witness a common thread woven through these healing traditions. Regardless of the culture, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman, Indian, or Chinese, early healers rarely dismissed individuals with cognitive or developmental differences outright. They may not have understood the biological causes, but they observed carefully, wrote thoughtfully, and sought explanations that fit within their worldviews. And in many cases, they sought ways to ease discomfort, reduce anxiety, and help families cope. Of course, there were exceptions. Some medical or philosophical texts described individuals with differences in harsh or impersonal terms, but these writings were often far removed from daily life. In the intimate world of households and villages, the response to a child or adult with cognitive differences more often leaned toward practical care rather than judgment. Now, as you stand at the edge of this ancient medical landscape, notice the quiet shift that has occurred. You have moved from prehistoric evidence, silent bones and burial practices, into a world where curiosity is beginning to speak. Early healers, despite their limited tools, tried to understand. They observed closely, recorded respectfully, listened to families, and sought meaning. This curiosity marks the beginning of the long evolution toward modern understanding. It represents humanity's earliest attempts to answer the gentle question, why are we different from one another? And more importantly, how can we care for one another with wisdom? As the lanterns dim in your imagined ancient healing house, you feel a sense of continuity, of people across thousands of years watching, wondering, and caring. And in that soft continuity, wrapped in the timeless glow of human curiosity, the story of understanding moves quietly forward. You drift now into a gentler, quieter stretch of the ancient world, one not dominated by temples or healers or grand philosophical scrolls, but by the steady rhythms of community life. This is where humanity spent most of its history, in small villages, on narrow streets, in modest homes that smelled of bread and smoke and damp earth after rain. And as you walk forward, you realize that this is where most people with Down syndrome truly lived their days, not in the presence of priests or scribes, but among neighbors, siblings, field workers, and aunties who always seemed to know everything about everyone. You step onto a dusty path in a settlement somewhere in West Asia, maybe Anatolia, maybe the Levant. It's hard to tell. The structures blend seamlessly with the land, made of the same earth they sit upon. Chickens trot around with the misplaced confidence of creatures who have no idea they're edible. A dog sniffs your sandal with the weary suspicion of someone who's seen too many travelers. In the center of the settlement, a group of villagers shell beans, their hands working with effortless rhythm. And among them sits a young adult with the telltale, gentler facial features, almond-shaped eyes, and rounder cheeks you've begun to recognize from skull remains and statues across many periods of history. The person hums softly as they work, dropping beans into a bowl with surprising precision. This is where the mainstream historical fact emerges softly. Many archaeological sites worldwide show that individuals with Down syndrome were cared for into adolescence and adulthood, meaning communities provided daily support far beyond infancy. Evidence of long-term survival implies consistent caregiving, shared duties, and a social willingness to accommodate difference. You watch as a neighbor hands the young adult a handful of beans and smiles, not condescendingly, not nervously, but as though this interaction has happened every day for years, and it probably has. In small-scale societies, routine is a form of love. You make your way toward a house where an older woman is baking flatbread. She offers a piece to a young child with developmental delays, guiding him through a simple chore, shaping a dough ball, patting it flat, handing it over to her. The child's pace is slower, but the family adapts. The mother hands him a smaller portion than the others. The grandmother praises every step he completes. The sibling fixes any mistakes without fuss. One of your 3-section jokes arrives here, sliding in like a sleepy cat. The grandmother's praise is so enthusiastic, you suspect she'd congratulate a rock for trying its best to be a pebble. Ancient grandmas, it seems, were operating on the same firmware as modern ones. You sit for a moment under a shade canopy woven from reeds. The breeze carries faint scents, bread, wool, sheep, and the unmistakable hint of a goat doing something mischievous out of sight. Daily life in these communities is simple but structured. Wake early, work, rest, share meals, attend festivals, repeat. People with cognitive differences fit into this pattern because the pattern itself is forgiving. There are tasks for every skill level: sorting grain, carrying water, feeding animals, shaping clay, weaving simple cords, tending fires, or just participating in family chores at a slower pace. These tasks aren't assignments made out of pity, they're natural roles. The community values consistency more than speed, and someone who is gentle, predictable, and calm can be incredibly helpful, especially in societies where patience is a survival skill. But you also notice something more complex. In many small communities, difference wasn't medicalized, it wasn't analyzed, it wasn't pathologized. It was simply lived with. You see a young man guiding his sibling with Down syndrome to a gathering place, holding his hand lightly. You hear a neighbor chatting casually about the child's quirks, the same way she talks about her goat's stubbornness or her own aching knees. These are not perfect worlds, of course. Some communities struggled with superstition or fear or limited resources. Some individuals faced neglect in harsher environments. But in many cases, perhaps more than stereotypical assumptions allow, people with Down syndrome weren't excluded. They were absorbed into the slow heartbeat of communal life. You move now into a different region, perhaps Celtic Europe, perhaps a pastoral community in the Caucasus. The specific geography matters less than the pattern. Small villages tend to converge on the same rhythms, the same social logic. Everyone has a place. And so you watch a group of children playing a simple game involving stones, circles drawn in dirt, and what you suspect are very confusing rules. Among them is a child with Down syndrome. The other children adjust the game slightly to include him. Nothing dramatic, just tiny accommodations made instinctively. They slow the pace. They give easier tasks. They cheer a little louder when he drops a stone into the circle correctly. This isn't modern inclusive education. There is no IEP meeting, no occupational therapist taking notes, no specialist offering interventions. But the core instinct to include someone, to let them be part of the rhythm, still exists. You overhear two women gossiping nearby. One mentions how the child repeats the same phrases often, usually before meals. The other nods knowingly, as though this repetition is just another charming quirk of village life, like the neighbor who always tells the same fishing story but refuses to admit it gets bigger every time. That's your second gentle joke. Apparently, even in the ancient world, at least one man was exaggerating his trout. As the day settles into afternoon, you notice a village elder teaching children basic tasks: how to braid rope, how to grind flour, how to tie knots. The child with Down syndrome is included in the lesson, receiving a simpler knot to practice. The elder's voice is calm, patient, and steady, the way someone sounds when they've been alive so long that nothing surprises them anymore. This is one of the quirky tidbits for the section. Some archaeological sites show rope fragments tied in simple, repeated patterns, possibly the work of individuals practicing or contributing in ways aligned with their abilities. Rope making was a humble but essential craft. If someone could tie consistent loops, even slowly, that contribution mattered. Not everything had to be fast to be valuable. Now the sun begins lowering, casting soft amber light across rooftops. The evening meal is being prepared: lentils maybe, or barley porridge, or a stew thick with onions and herbs. People gather in small groups, sharing food on clay plates, talking about the weather, animals, and the ever-popular topic of whether the rains will be late again. You sit with one family as they dine. Their son with Down syndrome sits between his parents, eating quietly. His mother occasionally wipes his chin. His father reminds him gently to chew more slowly. Nothing about this scene feels performative. No one uses dramatic language. No one whispers. No one treats him as a spectacle. This is community-level care, unspoken, unstructured, and deeply human. As the fire crackles, the scholarly debate emerges softly, the kind historians still argue about. Were people with developmental disabilities universally accepted in small communities, or were experiences much more varied depending on resources, local spirituality, and personality dynamics within families? The archaeological evidence shows long-term survival. The ethnographic patterns of small-scale societies suggest inclusion. The burial contexts imply value. But every community, past or present, contains complexity. Some offered warmth, others struggled. You lean back and let the evening wash over you. A toddler toddles past with a stick. A goat bleats indignantly at nothing. A woman scolds her husband for doing something unclear but definitely foolish. That's your third light joke. Ancient husbands were apparently doing suspicious things long before modern ones figured out how to load the dishwasher incorrectly. Night settles in. The stars thicken overhead. People drift into their homes. And you realize this truth gently. For many individuals with Down syndrome, daily life in small communities wasn't defined by labels or analysis or medical charts. It was defined by routine, belonging, tasks matched to ability, and the quiet patience of family members who adapted instinctively. You feel the rhythm of the community settling into sleep. Fires dim, voices hush, the ground cools beneath your feet, and you step forward again, ready to follow the next thread of this long human story. You step forward again, letting the soft glow of village fires fade behind you until the world around you expands into something more organized, more structured, more hierarchical. You're entering the era when humans built systems, not just homes and fields, but rules, institutions, expectations, and carefully defined social roles. Suddenly, life is shaped less by the gentle rhythm of community instinct and more by the frameworks of kingdoms, empires, and professional life. And here, in this new landscape, you begin to see how people with Down syndrome found places in societies that valued practicality above speed, reliability above brilliance, and steadiness above ambition. You walk into a bustling ancient workshop, maybe Egyptian, maybe Roman, perhaps somewhere along the Silk Road. Exact geography becomes hazy in the warmth of the room and the steady thump of tools. What matters is the pattern. These societies thrived on skilled labor, repetitive tasks, and craft traditions passed down across generations. A weaver sits at her loom, her hands moving with practiced fluidity. Nearby, a young man with Down syndrome sorts dyed threads by color. His pace is slow but consistent. The weaver nods approvingly. An accurate sort is more valuable than a fast one. In many craft households, such roles were natural fits. In ancient professional guilds, from pottery workshops to textile centers, family-based labor allowed individuals with developmental disabilities to contribute to specific stages of production. Archaeological remains show consistent participation in low-risk, repetitive tasks, especially those related to sorting, preparation, or finishing. You watch the workshop fill with afternoon sunlight, illuminating shelves of partially finished goods. The smell of wool and clay hangs in the air. No one here seems surprised or confused by the presence of someone with cognitive differences. In family-owned craftwork, difference simply shapes the job assignment. You shift scenes gently, drifting into a Roman household. The architecture feels cooler, more structured, like someone with strong opinions about right angles designed everything. A family is preparing to host a meal, and several enslaved or hired laborers bustle through the atrium. Among them is a young woman with Down syndrome, carrying linens to the dining area. Her task is simple but important, placing napkins in each guest's place. She focuses intently, smoothing every cloth with the same care. In historical documents from Greece and Rome, scholars note descriptions of household members, sometimes servants, sometimes relatives, who took on modest ritual duties, carrying lamps, preparing offerings, tidying altars. These roles appear consistently, often filled by individuals described as gentle, quiet, reliable. It's not a modern job, but it is a place to belong. You linger near a small temple. A priest arranges offerings with meticulous care. Next to him, a quiet assistant repeats simple tasks, lighting candles, carrying incense. Many ancient religious centers used this structure. Elders oversaw complex rituals, while helpers handled repetitive or calming tasks. In some cultures, gentle-tempered individuals were believed to create calmer ritual environments, making them ideal for these duties. A quirky little detail makes you smile. In some Mesopotamian temples, assistants were tasked with shooing away mischievous animals, which basically means someone's job was to chase temple ducks so they didn't steal offerings. Imagine explaining that on a resume. Skills: candle maintenance, incense placement, duck deterrence. You chuckle softly. That's your first joke for this section. You continue forward into a medieval scriptorium, one of those quiet rooms where monks and scribes copy texts by candlelight. Scripts in various states of completion line the desks. A boy with Down syndrome sits beside an older monk, not copying text, but mixing ink. It's a repetitive task requiring patience, gentle stirring, and attention to consistency. Not glamorous, not prestigious, but essential. There's a gentle truth that echoes across periods. Many traditional jobs weren't fast-paced. They valued steadiness, they valued repetition, they valued focus. And individuals with Down syndrome often excelled at precisely those traits. Some scribes, particularly in Celtic and Byzantine monasteries, wrote about novices who were slow in study but faithful in duty. Scholars debate whether some of these descriptions might refer to developmental differences. It is impossible to say with certainty, but the patterns align. You move now into agricultural settings where seasonal work shapes everything. You enter a farmstead where families are threshing grain. A young adult with Down syndrome holds a basket, collecting kernels as they scatter. The rhythm of his movements matches the rhythm of the work around him. Simple, steady, predictable. Agricultural societies often had highly distributed labor. Older individuals tended fires, children chased birds from fields, and slower workers performed simple tasks like gathering vegetables or carrying water. In communities where everyone worked according to ability, it was natural for cognitively different individuals to participate without stigma. Historians still argue whether the productivity-focused structure of agrarian societies always benefited individuals with developmental differences. Some say yes, everyone had a role. Others argue that during times of scarcity, gentler workers were vulnerable. As with most things in history, the truth probably shifts from region to region, year to year, household to household. The sun begins to lower as you drift deeper into the world of structured labor. You find yourself in a medieval market square where artisans display their goods. At one stall, a man selling pottery is assisted by his sister, who clearly has Down syndrome. Her job is to hand over wrapped goods to customers and place coins carefully into a pouch. Customers greet her warmly. The stall is known not only for its pots, but for the family running it. And in small economic units, reputation mattered more than speed or profit margins. A gentle drizzle starts to fall. You follow a group of workers into a covered hall where they sort grain for storage. Under the dim light, you see another adult with the familiar facial features. He's humming quietly, tapping his fingers on a wooden bin as he works. Occasionally, he pauses to line up tools with perfect symmetry. A coworker teases him good-naturedly, not mockery, but the same way someone teases a friend who alphabetizes their spices. That's your second joke. Apparently, someone in this hall has made grain organization their entire personality. Daily work wasn't just economic, it was social. These tasks forged identity, belonging, and relationships. And individuals with Down syndrome were not excluded from these bonds. Their slow pace wasn't an inconvenience. It was simply part of who they were, and communities adapted instinctively. You step now toward the heart of professional life in many civilizations, the marketplace of roles that were more formal: guards, scribes, bakers, porters, attendants. You won't find many individuals with cognitive differences in positions requiring quick reactions or complex decisions, but you will find them in positions requiring predictability. A temple attendant who lights candles in the same order every night. A bakery helper who shapes dough into consistent patterns. A stable worker who brushes animals calmly and fearlessly. These roles appear in written records, scattered like quiet footnotes of inclusion. In some Roman estates, individuals described as simple-minded but warm in spirit were recorded as being particularly good with animals, especially young livestock. Their calm manner soothed skittish creatures. This detail, tucked into agricultural treatises, shows how ancient writers recognized strengths even when they lacked the vocabulary to describe them. You reach the end of the workday. Lanterns begin to glow. People pack up tools, wash their hands, stretch aching joints. And as you stand among them, listening to casual chatter and the soft clatter of closing stalls, a realization settles into your bones. Structured labor didn't erase difference, it absorbed it. It gave people with Down syndrome a rhythm, a set of expectations, a place in the flow of daily life. Not idealized, not perfect, not always gentle, but often practical, familiar, and quietly supportive. You lean against a wooden post, letting the hum of an ancient workday fade into the night. Someone nearby makes a joke about their coworker's terrible singing voice. That's your third joke. Even in ancient worlds, apparently, someone was tone deaf and proud. But for now, you feel yourself ready to move again, deeper into history's winding path, where the next chapters will bring new ideas, new fears, and new shifts in understanding. But for now, you hold this truth softly. Work, in all its forms, created space for belonging. You ease forward into the centuries again, letting the late medieval streets settle behind your shoulders like a heavy cloak you didn't realize you were carrying. The murmurs of guild halls and parish gossip fade, and you find yourself stepping into the early modern world, where everything looks familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. You move through narrow alleys lined with timber-framed houses, but every window seems to hold a new tension, one built on the growing power of print, the tightening grip of churches, and the ever-trickling anxiety of people who spent a lot of time worrying about souls, signs, and anything that might hint at divine favor or disfavor. And yes, you spot someone scrubbing laundry in the street with more determination than you've ever applied to any single adult task, including trying to fix your Wi-Fi. You notice immediately that something begins shifting in how people interpret physical disabilities, including signs of Down syndrome. It isn't that mercy disappears. Humans always manage to hold surprising pockets of gentleness, but you also feel how pressure builds in other directions. Printed pamphlets, sermons, and even traveling plays start shaping what people imagine difference means. You hear whispers that frame a child's unusual features as a mark, a thing to be interpreted rather than simply accepted. And you sense how this becomes a new kind of burden for families. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you walk. Early modern Europe was overwhelmingly shaped by Christian doctrine, and churches, Catholic and Protestant alike, held huge cultural authority over defining the normal human condition. Physical and intellectual disabilities were often discussed in theological terms rather than medical ones. Many records from the time describe children with visible differences as innocents, a label that sometimes brought protection, but also an assumption of permanent dependency. And you can practically feel how that term follows you down the cobblestone street like a slightly nagging echo. You pause at the door of a low-roofed cottage, drawn by the rhythmic scrape of a chair being pushed across a floor. Inside, you see a mother guiding her teenage daughter, her gait soft, her features unmistakably consistent with Down syndrome, toward a stool near the hearth. The movement is practical, unhurried, deeply familiar. The daughter stirs a pot with deliberate care, and although the spoon clacks against the rim a few times, no one seems bothered. Within these walls, she isn't an omen or a symbol or a theological puzzle. She's a member of the household who contributes to everyday routines the same way anyone else does. But step outside that door, and the tone shifts. You hear neighbors muttering about special children and blessed fools. The language sounds gentle, but lands differently when you're listening from inside the girl's quiet world. Historians still argue whether these terms were primarily protective, keeping such individuals shielded from harsh judgments, or quietly restrictive, reinforcing that they would never be seen as fully capable adults. You find yourself rolling that debate around in your mind like a pebble in your pocket, especially as you pass a church bulletin posted crookedly on a door, warning parishioners to look for signs of moral disorder in their communities. You can't help but imagine how many kinds of signs got swept under that umbrella. You wander toward a marketplace next, and the smells hit you instantly. Dried fish, damp cloth, a whiff of something that might be cinnamon, but might also be dust with an attitude. People bustle around wooden stalls, haggling with the kind of good-natured irritation humans have perfected over thousands of years. And there, at a table stacked with simple pottery, a young man with Down syndrome carefully arranges bowls into neat rows. His motions are practiced, confident, and he beams when a customer buys one, slipping the coin into a pouch with the kind of pride you usually see in people who manage to assemble IKEA furniture without yelling. His father stands nearby, casting a quiet, watchful eye. You sense both pride and protectiveness. For many families in the early modern world, community life made it possible for disabled individuals to take on roles that match their abilities, helping at stalls, tending animals, assisting with chores. You don't see institutional care dominating this era. Families are still the primary caregivers. But you also pick up on how public roles are limited. The boy at the pottery stall can organize, carry, sweep, but you know he won't become a guild member, won't inherit the business formally, won't be seen as a full citizen in the legal sense. You watch him smile at another customer and quietly hope he's not aware of how many invisible walls stand around him. A breeze shifts, bringing the faint smell of ink and parchment. You follow it to a small workshop where a printer feeds sheets into a wooden press, each crank of the handle releasing the heavy sigh of machinery that's still getting used to being a technology. You glance at the printed sheets hanging to dry and catch a glimpse of a pamphlet discussing monstrous births, a phrase that makes you wince so quickly you pull an unintentional muscle. The pamphlet includes drawings of infants with exaggerated features, some resembling Down syndrome, some not, and wild claims about what such births meant. One paragraph insists that God sets forth signs to warn mankind. Another claims nature has erred in her work. A third, somewhat unexpectedly, blames comets, which honestly feels on brand for a society that hadn't quite pinned down astronomy yet. This is your quirky tidbit for this section. Some early modern pamphlets genuinely blamed unusual births on frightened mothers who supposedly saw something shocking while pregnant. If your face just did a small grimace, welcome to the club. You continue walking, and the cultural contradictions of the era unfold with each step. You see families lovingly supporting members with disabilities. You see neighbors offering bread or watching them when caregivers are busy. Then you also overhear a street preacher declaring that difference is a sign of corruption in the world. And you can tell the preacher's voice carries because you spot at least 3 people nodding with the kind of vigor usually reserved for discount sales. You wander toward a larger town square, and music drifts through the air, a lively tune played on lute and drum. People gather for an afternoon fair, and you notice a performer with distinct facial features dancing among the crowd, bells sewn into his sleeves. Some spectators clap, others smirk. The role of village fool, or simple performer, often became the only socially sanctioned space for those who didn't fit traditional molds. It's joyful and disheartening at the same time. You feel tension settle in your shoulders. Is this celebration or exploitation? Historians still argue whether such roles offered genuine community inclusion or simply disguised exclusion behind laughter. A small boy darts past you, chasing a hoop, and for a moment, everything softens. You see that the world is rarely consistent. Even now, acceptance lives right beside anxiety. Compassion lives right beside superstition. And through it all, individuals with Down syndrome carve out their places, not as symbols, but as human beings navigating a world that doesn't quite know what to do with its own beliefs. You take one last look around the square, noticing the uneven way the sun filters through the rooftops, leaving bright stripes of light across the ground. You let yourself slow down, letting the early modern world settle into your mind like a half-remembered dream. Then, with a quiet step forward, you begin drifting toward the next chapter in time. You drift now into the quieter corners of Enlightenment Europe, where the world begins to hum with new ideas, yet still carries the weight of old assumptions. The streets are cobbled and winding, the lamps gasping to life in the early evening, and there is a faint smell of coal smoke mixed with bread baking somewhere down an alley. You find yourself walking past academies, small clinics, and growing towns where curiosity about human difference is becoming more systematic. People are beginning to observe, categorize, and write with a kind of precision that would have been unimaginable a century or two before. And yet, the human heart, its patience, fear, and love remains unchanged. Imagine entering a modest clinic in Paris or London, somewhere in the mid-18th century. You notice a physician poring over notes, quill scratching lightly across paper, describing children with rounded facial features, a gentle temperament, and slower development. These are the earliest medical texts to mention what we now recognize as Down syndrome, though they do so in the clinical, impersonal style of the time. Dr. John Langdon Down, whom you'll meet later, will formalize the description. But even now, physicians are observing, noting, and theorizing. Some see deviations in appearance as a curiosity, others as a moral or physical anomaly. The language is often awkward, sometimes neutral, but mostly it is descriptive. Round faces, slanted eyes, small stature. You notice a mother holding her child in a sunlit room nearby. The child, slow to speak, hums a tune while stacking blocks, completely absorbed. There is no rush. No one is forcing progress. This is the human reality beneath the academic texts. Daily life is patience, rhythm, and small acts of care. Families are adapting intuitively, creating routines that provide comfort and stability. You realize that most of what survives in the archives are clinical notes and treatises, but the lived experience, feeding, dressing, teaching, playing, is far less documented, though no less important. In this era, a quirky historical tidbit emerges. Some 18th century physicians suggested that children with developmental differences should spend time outdoors, in structured gardens, observing plants and birds. They thought nature could calm restless spirits and teach patience. You can picture a small boy walking slowly among rows of herbs, touching leaves gently, his caregivers nearby. He may not understand botany, but he absorbs rhythm, repetition, and care. And perhaps the birds enjoy his company too. The debate of the time is subtle but persistent. Historians still argue whether early medical interest in Down syndrome was primarily driven by empathy and curiosity or by a desire to categorize, control, and normalize bodies and behaviors. Was it care or was it scientific objectification? The answer, as always, is tangled. Often both existed simultaneously. Observations that eventually informed compassionate care coexisted with terminology and attitudes that, to modernize, can feel cold. You drift now into a small classroom in a charitable institution. It's brightly lit, full of children learning basic literacy, counting, or handicrafts. Among them, a young girl with Down syndrome sits at a work table. She is not left alone, but neither is she singled out for special attention. A teacher demonstrates a simple weaving task, and the girl mimics carefully. She is slower than most, but she completes the sequence, aided by small gestures and patient guidance. You notice the quiet rhythm of repetition, string by string, thread by thread, learning through doing. No bells, no alarms, just a gentle cadence of motion. In homes and small communities, individuals with Down syndrome often contributed similarly. They assisted with domestic chores, folding laundry, carrying firewood, tending small animals, sweeping floors, or engaged in quiet crafts like embroidery, basket weaving, or candle making. Tasks were chosen not to challenge intelligence, but to support rhythm and predictability. Daily survival was a matter of incremental contributions. In these activities, families recognized ability as much as difference. Some medical observers recommended institutional settings, but many families resisted, holding their children close. The conflict between home care and institutional placement becomes a theme in this period. Families intuitively understood that belonging, routine, and gentle attention often mattered more than formal education or medical supervision. You can almost feel the tug-of-war, the desire to help, the fear of difference, and the warmth of familiar hands guiding small fingers through repetitive tasks. A second gentle joke surfaces. In one surviving account, a child spoke less than a parrot, but was equally amusing to visitors. The observer meant it kindly, but you can picture the child imitating birds in the courtyard, rolling eyes at the family dog, and somehow stealing the spotlight without intending to. Some humor, it seems, has always belonged to the unobserved moments. You wander now into a quieter street, where evening lamps cast soft amber halos on the pavement. A caregiver walks beside a young adult, perhaps guiding him home from a local market. He carries small packages carefully, taking pride in the accuracy of his steps. In early Enlightenment cities, documentation shows that adult survival into midlife was increasing. Families provided ongoing care. Communities were still adapting to difference, often slowly, often imperfectly, but inclusion in domestic and economic life persisted. You pause at a window where a mother instructs a child in simple household tasks, pointing to shelves, counting dishes, and showing patterns in repetition. Repetition and routine are everywhere, in washing, feeding, sweeping, and simple trades. It is rhythm more than ambition that defines participation. You hear a whisper in your mind. Even as medical texts proliferate, daily life continues quietly, unchanged in its essential patterns. A third whimsical note for this section, some manuals for caregivers in 18th century Europe recommended teaching children with cognitive differences to play simple musical instruments to foster patience. Imagine a tiny harp or a small flute, fingers fumbling, music tentative, and the family clapping along. Whether or not it created musical geniuses is debatable, but the act itself demonstrates recognition of potential, enjoyment, and calm engagement. Finally, you notice the contrast with earlier centuries. Earlier communities relied heavily on instinctive inclusion. Now, inclusion is being mediated by emerging medical ideas, theories, and printed knowledge. Families and caregivers negotiate between old intuition and new prescriptions. They adapt, modify, and protect. And through it all, individuals with Down syndrome continue to inhabit domestic spaces, contribute to tasks, and experience belonging, even as society begins to categorize more formally. You let yourself drift along the cobbled streets one last time. The warmth of hearths and candlelight, the rhythm of daily chores, the gentle hum of human care all settle into your mind. You notice, above all, that in this era, curiosity and care intertwine. Observation is beginning to meet empathy, even if imperfectly. The story of Down syndrome, like the streetlights, is faint but persistent, present in households, in small contributions, and in the enduring rhythm of everyday life. You step now into the 19th century, a period humming with transformation. The streets are wider, the buildings taller, and the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and horse-drawn carriages. Cities are expanding. Factories rise along riverbanks, and human life is being measured more rigorously than ever before. In this shifting world, curiosity about the human body and mind becomes formalized. Medical texts, institutional records, and the earliest statistics start to shape a narrative about difference, including Down syndrome. And yet, within this swirl of progress, human care and household intimacy remain quietly vital. Picture yourself in a modest, sunlit room in London or Paris. A young physician pores over case notes. He describes children and adults with rounded facial features, low muscle tone, and developmental differences. This is the work of early clinical observation. Dr. John Langdon Down, later in the century, would categorize these traits systematically, giving what we now call Down syndrome its first medical name. But long before labels, families and communities are still figuring out how to integrate daily life with difference. Observing doesn't mean replacing care. It often sits alongside it, like a shadow that doesn't quite intrude. A mainstream historical fact appears by the mid-19th century. Specialized institutions for individuals with developmental differences begin to emerge across Europe and North America. Some families voluntarily placed children in these facilities, believing they offered education, socialization, and safety. Others resisted, preferring to maintain care at home, where routine, familiar relationships, and gentle guidance provided the structure needed for survival. Step into one such household. A young woman with Down syndrome helps fold linens, the folds neat and precise, each movement deliberate. She hums softly, a melody learned from her mother and repeated countless times. Her younger sibling imitates her tone, the family dog barks in rhythm, and a candle flickers on the wooden table. This is domestic life in motion, ordinary, essential, patient. In the rush of history, these everyday moments are rarely recorded, yet they represent the lived experience of countless individuals. A quirky historical detail surfaces here. Some early institutional manuals suggested teaching children with cognitive differences to perform repetitive musical tasks like ringing small bells at set intervals. The goal was to foster discipline and rhythm, and perhaps calm anxious behavior. One can almost picture the scene: a child, eyes wide with concentration, jingling a tiny bell perfectly, while older children giggle quietly in the background. The attempt is both practical and oddly endearing. You move now to the streets. Factories roar in the distance, the clatter of wheels and looms echoing down alleys. Children with developmental differences are often kept at home, away from the machinery, but they occasionally participate in simpler forms of work, such as assisting with household chores, running errands, or helping in small family businesses. Inclusion persists in domestic spaces, even if public roles are constrained. Routine is the constant. Folding, carrying, observing, repeating, and in repetition lies both competence and comfort. A debate of the era quietly hums beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether the rise of institutions represented progressive care or social segregation. Did these schools and workshops provide genuine skill building and protection, or did they reinforce exclusion by separating individuals from their families and communities? Likely both were true, depending on circumstance, locale, and individual staff attitudes. The records show success stories and tragic failures, often side by side, like a quilt stitched with both warmth and fraying edges. You wander now into a small educational setting within an institution. A teacher patiently guides several students through simple arithmetic and literacy exercises. One young adult with Down syndrome traces letters carefully, pausing to match shapes to sounds. Repetition is everywhere: writing, reading, learning songs, practicing chores. The structure is formal, yet the approach is often gentle. Tasks are designed to match abilities, reinforcing both skill and confidence. You sense that, even amidst rigid schedules, empathy can still flourish. A second light joke appears. In one account, a child repeatedly answered questions with the same cheerful phrase, causing the teacher to exclaim, "I begin to suspect he thinks I only have one question in the world." The observer adds that the child's persistence was admirable. Humor, consistency, and patience. These qualities shine through centuries of records. You step outside and notice a garden. Some institutions cultivate plants, both for teaching practical skills and for therapeutic calm. Children and adults with developmental differences tend rows of flowers, herbs, or vegetables. You imagine their small hands brushing the soil, their eyes tracing rows of green, the soft hum of conversation drifting from nearby paths. Some modern scholars suggest that horticultural engagement provided early forms of occupational therapy, though contemporary observers rarely framed it that way. Daily life in 19th century homes and institutions is a negotiation between old rhythms and new structures. Families work to maintain intimacy, protect routines, and provide individualized care. Institutions offer structure, education, and sometimes safety, yet they also impose a degree of separation. In both environments, inclusion is partial but persistent, embedded in gestures, repetition, and daily rhythm. A third quirky note emerges. Early case studies sometimes describe children with Down syndrome as having unusually steady temperaments in domestic or institutional tasks, calming more excitable peers or staff. Observers note that their predictability and gentle manner create a quiet harmony, which was valued even if it wasn't formally acknowledged. You imagine a quiet domestic scene. The child hums, peers chatter, and the teacher or caregiver sighs in relief. Peace, even temporary, is always a gift. Finally, evening descends over the city. Lanterns glow in streets, smoke curls from chimneys, and the hum of industrial life fades gradually into quieter domestic sounds. Families gather for meals, share stories, and guide children through familiar routines. You notice that, despite shifting societal pressures and formalized observation, the heartbeat of care, routine, repetition, empathy remains constant. Individuals with Down syndrome continue to live, contribute, and experience belonging, their lives quietly shaping and shaped by the communities around them. As you step back and observe this century of emerging medical knowledge, growing institutions, and shifting family dynamics, one truth becomes clear. The 19th century represents both progress and complexity. Science is beginning to define difference. Families are negotiating inclusion. Institutions offer possibility and limitation simultaneously. Through it all, human care, small, patient, repetitive, remains central. And with that realization, the scene gently softens into night, preparing you to move forward again along the long, patient path of understanding and inclusion that stretches into modern times. You drift forward into the early 20th century, a world in motion. Trams rattle along cobbled streets, the faint scent of gasoline mixes with baking bread, and overhead, the first electric street lamps hum softly as dusk settles. This is a world where science has begun to speak with authority, and institutions, schools, clinics, and specialized workshops play a larger role than ever in the lives of people with developmental differences. Families remain central, but their influence now coexists with broader social systems that promise guidance, education, and sometimes, unfortunately, control. You step into a sunlit classroom in a small urban institution. Children are seated at wooden desks, lined up in neat rows. A young adult with Down syndrome is practicing simple arithmetic, moving colored beads along a string. Repetition is everywhere. Letters, numbers, chores, and songs echo through the room. The routine is predictable, almost hypnotic. You notice the gentle humming of a caretaker beside the student, softly encouraging accuracy and concentration. The rhythm is steady, comforting, and profoundly human. By the early 1900s, many countries in Europe and North America established specialized schools and workshops for individuals with developmental differences. These institutions emphasized vocational training, hygiene, and basic education. While some families welcomed the support, others feared the loss of intimacy and the isolation that could accompany institutional placement. Records show both benefits, such as improved literacy and vocational skills, and significant limitations, including rigid schedules and restricted social opportunities. You wander to a quieter corridor, where an adult with Down syndrome tends a small garden. He waters rows of herbs with care, pausing occasionally to observe the growth of leaves. Some scholars suggest that horticultural tasks were therapeutic, promoting calmness and patience. You notice the sunlight glinting off the soil, illuminating the gentle focus on his face. This is not just work, it's a space for agency, a rhythm of accomplishment that echoes centuries of domestic and communal life. A quirky historical detail emerges here. Some manuals from the early 20th century recommended that individuals with cognitive differences perform musical exercises or rhythmic clapping to develop coordination and social participation. One account describes a young boy enthusiastically tapping out a beat on a wooden bench, his persistence both amusing and endearing. It's hard not to smile, imagining the patient teacher counting out beats while the child hums a tune entirely of his own making. You move into the bustling streets outside. The world is expanding rapidly. Automobiles begin replacing horse-drawn carriages, factories hum with efficiency, and city life demands new social adaptations. Families with members who have Down syndrome continue to negotiate inclusion. Some children attend public schools for part of the day, supplemented by specialized programs. Others remain primarily within the home or institution. You notice the delicate balance, exposure to broader society, tempered by the need for predictable structure and care. Historians still argue whether early institutionalization was liberating or restrictive. Some scholars highlight that vocational training and structured care provided safety, skill building, and social interaction. Others emphasize that the segregated nature of many institutions curtailed independence, personal expression, and family bonds. The debate is nuanced, reflecting a time when society struggled to reconcile emerging scientific knowledge with human compassion. You enter a domestic scene now, imagining a typical family in this period. A mother and father sit near a hearth while their adult child with Down syndrome folds laundry, meticulously aligning hems and creases. Siblings assist gently, teasing in ways that feel affectionate rather than cruel. The child hums quietly, absorbed in the tactile rhythm of cloth. Repetition is not punishment, it is comfort, mastery, and participation in household life. A second light joke floats into the moment. The older sibling whispers that their brother could fold socks with the precision of a watchmaker, prompting the whole family to laugh quietly. Humor continues to exist, unbroken, bridging centuries and contexts. It softens the discipline of daily life and affirms the humanity of those often categorized by difference. You step next into an urban workshop where individuals with Down syndrome engage in vocational training. Some shape clay, others sort textiles, while a few assist with simple mechanical tasks. The rhythm of their work is steady, predictable, and valued. Productivity is modest, but each contribution matters. You sense a continuity here. The same principles you observed in ancient workshops persist, now codified within institutions and vocational programs. Inclusion, repetition, and predictable roles remain central to experience. A third quirky detail emerges. In some institutions, children were encouraged to maintain hobby collections, stones, leaves, small tools, to nurture focus and calm attention. One observer notes a child meticulously sorting pebbles by size, commenting on how the big ones look fatter than the small ones. Small joys, minute achievements, and repeated attention to detail were part of daily life, and they mattered. Evening descends, and the city quiets. The low hum of early automobiles fades into distant conversations and the occasional bark of a dog. Within homes and institutions alike, the day closes with meals, gentle guidance, and rituals of routine, preparing for sleep, tidying rooms, and affirming small successes. The rhythm of care, repetition, and belonging endures, even as social and scientific structures evolve. In this period, you notice an emerging tension. Society increasingly frames difference in medical or educational terms, yet families continue to ground daily life in intimate, patient routines. Individuals with Down syndrome inhabit both worlds, the expanding public understanding and the intimate domestic experience. Both offer benefits and limitations, but continuity exists. Care, predictability, and participation remain central. As night settles fully over the city, lanterns glow along streets, and hearths flicker in homes. Children and adults with Down syndrome move through familiar patterns of evening, quiet reflection, gentle tasks, or simply resting under attentive family eyes. You feel the weight of centuries in the soft hum of domestic life, the constant thread of inclusion, the slow pulse of participation, and the persistent rhythm of human care that bridges time and culture. You step softly into the mid-20th century, a world oscillating between rapid innovation and lingering traditions. Cars roar past, radios broadcast music and news, and the faint smell of gasoline blends with fresh bread from corner bakeries. Cities hum with activity, yet in homes, classrooms, and specialized facilities, life continues at a more intimate, deliberate pace. This is a world where attitudes toward Down syndrome and disability in general are shifting under the combined influence of medicine, education, and social policy. But the human rhythm of care and inclusion quietly endures. Imagine entering a classroom in the 1950s. The walls are lined with maps, charts, and motivational posters urging neatness and effort. Students sit in neat rows, some in standard programs, others in special classes. A young adult with Down syndrome is at a desk near the window, working with wooden shapes, sorting squares, triangles, and circles into carefully labeled trays. The teacher leans over, whispering encouragement, but mostly lets the child work at their own pace. The air smells faintly of chalk dust, ink, and wood polish. The sound of pencils scratching and the occasional cough of a classmate blends into a soft urban symphony. A mainstream historical fact arises here. During the mid-20th century, many Western countries expanded access to education for children with developmental disabilities, including Down syndrome. Specialized schools and classrooms were established to provide instruction tailored to abilities, often emphasizing vocational training and life skills. Public understanding began to shift from viewing these individuals purely as medical curiosities to recognizing them as capable of learning, contributing, and forming meaningful relationships. You move to a domestic scene, a family kitchen where a mother is teaching her adult child with Down syndrome to set the table. Plates, utensils, napkins, each task is repeated in a familiar rhythm. He arranges them carefully, hums softly, and occasionally looks up for guidance. A sibling offers a gentle correction, and everyone laughs quietly when a spoon slips out of place. Routine shapes the day, folding laundry, preparing meals, tending a small garden. These are familiar rhythms echoing centuries of domestic life, offering comfort, structure, and belonging. A quirky historical detail emerges. Some mid-century educators and therapists believed that rhythmic clapping or simple musical exercises could enhance motor coordination and social engagement for children with Down syndrome. Imagine a small group of students, hands clapping in time with a piano, some humming, others smiling quietly. One child taps too fast, another too slow, but the teacher guides them gently, creating a soft harmony of persistence, patience, and laughter. You can almost hear the faint chuckle in the background, a timeless accompaniment to effort and routine. You walk into a vocational workshop nearby. Adults with Down syndrome sort textiles, fold laundry, or help assemble simple products. Their work is steady, predictable, and valued, even if modest in scale. The structure mirrors earlier centuries' workshops, yet now it exists within formal institutions with clear schedules, documentation, and accountability. Work is not exploitative, but framed as a developmental and social opportunity, allowing participants to contribute while learning skills and interacting with peers. Historians still debate whether institutionalization in this era was protective or isolating. Specialized schools and workshops provided education, safety, and socialization opportunities, yet they sometimes limited family interaction and full community integration. Records show examples of both: thriving individuals who found purpose in these environments and others who struggled with separation, highlighting the complexity of inclusion in a world negotiating old and new paradigms. You drift toward a neighborhood park. Children play, adults walk, and a young woman with Down syndrome tends a small herb patch beside a bench, humming quietly as she waters and prunes. The rhythm of gardening, predictable, repetitive, soothing, provides calm and focus. Families, schools, and therapists recognize the therapeutic benefits of such activities, blending centuries-old instinct with emerging scientific observation. A second light joke arises. In one anecdote, a teacher described a student who arranged garden stones so precisely that visitors thought he was measuring the universe in pebbles. Precision, routine, and quiet humor intertwine, offering both structure and delight. Such moments highlight the continuity of everyday life, where difference is accommodated through patience and observation. You step into a community center where a small group gathers for recreational activities. Adults with Down syndrome play simple games, practice crafts, and engaging music. These activities foster social skills, coordination, and confidence. Observers note that structured leisure, alongside vocational and educational programs, promotes holistic development. Even simple patterns, rolling a ball back and forth, weaving colored threads, or tapping a rhythm on a drum, reinforce predictability, self-efficacy, and enjoyment. A third quirky note appears. Some programs encouraged collecting items, buttons, shells, or leaves, as a way to practice categorization and focus. One adult meticulously sorted buttons by color and size, delighting in the repetition while the instructor looked on, smiling. Small joys and careful attention echo practices seen throughout history, showing continuity across centuries in the ways humans engage with difference. Evening settles over the city. Street lamps glow softly, windows flicker with domestic warmth, and distant traffic hums a quiet lullaby. In homes, families gather for meals, share stories, and reinforce routines that provide comfort and stability. Individuals with Down syndrome move through predictable patterns, preparing for sleep, engaging in small chores, or participating in family interactions. Inclusion, care, and belonging persist, even as societal structures grow more formal and scientific. In this period, you notice an emerging duality. Medical and educational frameworks provide understanding, structure, and skill building, yet human care, intimacy, and rhythm remain indispensable. Individuals with Down syndrome inhabit both worlds: the formalized, observed spaces of schools and institutions, and the private, familiar environments of family life. Both shape experience, but continuity of care and routine threads through centuries, tying ancient domestic rhythms to modern practice. You let yourself pause beneath a glowing street lamp, listening to distant voices, dogs barking, and a faint melody from a nearby radio. The mid-20th century is a world negotiating old prejudices and new understanding, yet the quiet heartbeat of human care, routine, repetition, patience, and empathy remains constant. Inclusion persists, sometimes imperfectly, but always with a thread of persistence stretching across generations. You drift now into the late 20th century, a time of rapid social, cultural, and technological change. Television broadcasts flicker in living rooms, Radios hum with news, and typewriters clatter in offices. Cities are louder, busier, and more interconnected than ever before. Yet, for people with Down syndrome, life continues to be shaped by a delicate balance. Expanding opportunities for education, work, and social participation, tempered by lingering societal attitudes and the ongoing need for routine, care, and inclusion. Imagine entering a modern classroom in the 1970s or 1980s. Large windows illuminate rows of desks where children and young adults with a range of abilities work alongside aides and teachers. A young adult with Down syndrome is tracing letters in a workbook, occasionally pausing to hum a soft tune learned earlier. A teacher leans over, encouraging precision, patience, and self-expression. The room smells faintly of pencil shavings, glue, and floor polish, a comforting blend that seems to anchor the space in daily routine. A mainstream historical fact emerges: during this era, the movement toward inclusive education gained momentum. Many countries passed legislation promoting access to public schools for students with developmental disabilities, emphasizing integration rather than segregation. While full inclusion was often aspirational rather than immediate, the principle reflected a growing recognition of the right of people with Down syndrome to participate in mainstream society. You drift now to a vocational training workshop. Adults with Down syndrome engage in tasks ranging from assembling small parts to preparing packages for shipment. The environment is structured yet supportive, offering repetition, predictability, and incremental responsibility. Tasks are matched to individual ability, allowing for competence and confidence to grow. Families and educators collaborate to ensure that participation remains meaningful, blending skill building with social inclusion. In some late 20th century workshops, music therapy was used alongside vocational training. One account describes a group of adults tapping rhythms on simple instruments to coordinate assembly tasks, producing a soft, accidental melody. Observers remarked that the combination of repetition, rhythm, and music improved focus and morale. You imagine the gentle cacophony, a human orchestra of productivity and patience, echoing centuries of similar practices where sound, rhythm, and gentle guidance supported engagement. Historians still argue about the pace and effectiveness of mainstream integration. Some suggest that inclusive schooling provided unprecedented opportunities for socialization, skill development, and self-determination. Others caution that early inclusion efforts sometimes lacked sufficient support, leaving students vulnerable to misunderstanding, bullying, or frustration. The balance between integration and protection remained delicate, shaped by individual, familial, and societal circumstances. You move into a domestic scene, a family kitchen, warm with evening light. A young adult with Down syndrome carefully folds laundry while humming a tune, occasionally glancing toward a sibling who helps with the table setting. Routine continues to shape life: meals, chores, leisure, and small household tasks. These familiar rhythms provide comfort, reinforce competence, and support independence. Even as public frameworks change, the domestic heartbeat remains central. A second gentle joke emerges. One caregiver noted that their adult child with Down syndrome arranged books by height as if constructing a tiny city skyline, and the family laughed softly at the meticulous dedication. Humor continues to accompany the mundane, reinforcing relationships and providing shared moments of joy. You drift into a community setting now, a recreational center where adults with Down syndrome gather for social and creative activities. They participate in crafts, music, and games. Structured schedules coexist with playful improvisation. Rhythm, repetition, and inclusion are everywhere, sorting materials, following simple instructions, and interacting socially. Participation reinforces identity, belonging, and competence, echoing practices established across centuries. A third quirky detail arises. Some programs encouraged participants to maintain personal journals or scrapbooks, documenting daily activities, favorite objects, or small achievements. One individual meticulously arranged photographs, captions, and pressed flowers, creating a miniature world of personal history and accomplishment. It is an intimate echo of earlier traditions of attention, categorization, and careful observation. You wander outside into a quiet street, the city alive with traffic and chatter. Families walk home from school, neighbors greet one another, and a young adult with Down syndrome carries a small shopping bag with care and focus. Independence is growing, yet structured support remains essential. Communities are slowly learning to accommodate difference, balancing inclusion with the need for routine, predictability, and gentle guidance. Evening descends, and the city softens. Neon lights glow faintly in shop windows, televisions flicker inside homes, and families gather for dinner, reflection, and bedtime routines. Individuals with Down syndrome move through familiar rituals, preparing for sleep, tidying rooms, and participating in quiet domestic tasks. Across homes, institutions, and communities, the persistent thread of care, routine, repetition, patience, and empathy remain central, connecting centuries of lived experience. This period reflects duality. Society increasingly writes, potential, and value, yet human care, structure, and patience remain indispensable. Individuals with Down syndrome inhabit both worlds, structured social frameworks and the intimate, rhythm-driven domestic space. The ongoing challenge is harmonizing independence with support, inclusion with protection, and opportunity with continuity. As night settles fully over the city, you feel the gentle hum of history, decades of incremental change, small victories in daily life, and the enduring rhythm of care and belonging. The late 20th century is both a continuation and a transformation, showing that inclusion is possible, yet always built on the foundation of patient, persistent attention to human needs. You arrive now in the 21st century, a world that hums with digital connectivity, bright screens, and new possibilities. Cities are alive with the glow of streetlights, the distant whir of traffic, and the low murmur of human voices. Information moves faster than ever before, yet the core of human care, patience, routine, and gentle guidance remains as essential as it was in ancient streets and modest cottages centuries ago. For individuals with Down syndrome, life today offers opportunities unimaginable just decades ago, while the rhythm of daily inclusion continues quietly, steadfastly, behind the headlines and policy debates. Imagine entering a modern school or community center. Classrooms are bright and inclusive, technology is present but unobtrusive, and students with Down syndrome participate alongside peers in academic and social activities. One young adult carefully completes a math exercise on a tablet, fingers sliding deliberately across the screen. A teacher leans close, offering encouragement, but mostly allows independent work. The room smells faintly of disinfectant, fresh paper, and warm sunlight streaming through large windows. The air is calm, structured, and safe, a space where inclusion is actively supported. A mainstream historical fact today: individuals with Down syndrome have access to education, healthcare, employment opportunities, and social services that were unimaginable a century ago. Early interventions, therapies, and inclusive policies have transformed possibilities, allowing for increased independence, social integration, and quality of life. Communities are more aware of diversity, and support networks, both familial and institutional, offer guidance and resources tailored to individual needs. You drift into a home scene, a family preparing dinner together. An adult with Down syndrome stirs a pot, hums a familiar tune, and occasionally checks with a sibling or parent for confirmation. The kitchen is warm, smells of herbs and roasting vegetables filling the air. Routine continues to shape life: cooking, cleaning, leisure, and small household tasks. These rhythms provide comfort, mastery, and a sense of belonging. Care remains central, even in a world full of technological shortcuts and structured programs. A quirky contemporary detail: some families and community programs encourage mindfulness activities, such as gentle yoga or coloring, for individuals with Down syndrome to promote calm and focus. You can picture a quiet afternoon: soft music, a child carefully choosing colors, another gently stretching, the room filled with light and concentration. The intention is simple: supporting well-being through repetitive, predictable, and soothing practices. Historians and social scientists still debate the balance between independence and support in modern life. Some argue that inclusive education, workplace integration, and community engagement offer unprecedented autonomy. Others caution that without consistent, individualized support, individuals can encounter social barriers or struggle with expectations. The key, as families and caregivers recognize, is blending opportunity with structure, freedom with rhythm, and participation with empathy. You wander now into a community workshop where adults with Down syndrome engage in creative projects. One person is assembling handcrafted objects, another is painting quietly, and a small group practices a musical ensemble. The rhythm of work, play, and learning mirrors centuries of practice, predictable, structured, and empowering. Contributions are valued not just for productivity, but for personal fulfillment, social interaction, and skill building. Inclusion is deliberate and intentional, built on respect for each individual's abilities and preferences. In one program, a participant meticulously arranged beads for a jewelry project and remarked with a grin, "I am building a rainbow army." The instructor and peers laugh softly. Humor continues to accompany daily life, connecting generations, easing tension, and reinforcing relationships. You move outside to a quiet street lined with houses and small gardens. A young adult with Down syndrome carries groceries home, smiling and greeting neighbors. The rhythms of community life, walking the same paths, greeting familiar faces, performing small daily tasks, provide structure, safety, and belonging. Independence is fostered within predictable routines, offering opportunities for agency while maintaining comfort. A third quirky note, some modern programs encourage participants to maintain personal blogs, photo diaries, or journals documenting daily routines, creative projects, or reflections. One young adult carefully photographs a garden, writes brief captions, and shares it with friends and family online. The activity reinforces autonomy, observation, and personal narrative, echoing centuries of careful domestic and educational practices in new digital forms. Evening falls, softening the city's edges. Streetlights glow, windows flicker with domestic warmth, and distant traffic hums a gentle lullaby. Families gather for dinner, quiet conversation, and bedtime routines. Adults with Down syndrome move through familiar rituals, preparing for sleep, completing small tasks, reflecting on the day. Across homes, schools, and community programs, the rhythm of inclusion, routine, repetition, empathy remains central, a thread connecting the past to the present. Now, as the day winds down and you feel the gentle hum of modern life around you, let us linger in a slow, quiet reflection. The journey through centuries of human experience with Down syndrome reveals continuity as well as change. Families and communities have always navigated the tension between protection and inclusion, between curiosity and care. Repetition, rhythm, and gentle guidance remain central. Inclusion is not merely policy or education, it is the lived experience of ordinary days, shared tasks, quiet attention, and patient companionship. Across time, these rhythms have persisted, evolving in form but constant in essence. Imagine soft evening light filtering through a window, the gentle aroma of a home settling into warmth, and the quiet hum of everyday life. Children and adults with Down syndrome rest, complete chores, or engage in small projects that bring satisfaction and belonging. The world continues to offer opportunities, challenges, and surprises, but the essential heartbeat of care, patience, repetition, and inclusion remains steadfast. You feel that thread stretching from ancient communities to today, linking generations of human attention, empathy, and persistence. Slowly, the day fades into night. The warmth of hearth and home, the gentle rhythm of family and community, the quiet satisfaction of small accomplishments, all settle into memory. You can breathe out, relax, and let the cadence of this journey lull you into a reflective calm. Across time, across centuries, across cultures, one truth is clear. The lives of individuals with Down syndrome have always been interwoven with care, patience, and inclusion. And that rhythm continues, steady and reassuring, into your present moment. As you let your eyes close softly and your mind release the images of streets, homes, and classrooms across time, feel the gentle weight of centuries settling around you like a soft quilt. The rhythm of daily life, tasks, routines, hums, and gentle laughter remains unchanged even as society evolves. You sense the continuity of care, the pulse of patience, and the quiet insistence of inclusion stretching from ancient cottages, medieval workshops, Enlightenment classrooms, to modern community centers. There is a comforting constancy here, the repetition of small actions, the nurturing touch, the gentle guidance. Life moves forward, yet the essential rhythms persist. You imagine a small garden bathed in late evening light, a young adult tending herbs with calm focus, humming softly. You hear the faint sound of a distant piano, children folding laundry, a caregiver whispering encouragement. Humor and joy quietly ripple through routines, a perfectly folded towel, a bead sorted just right, a playful remark. These moments echo through history, softening the weight of centuries. Breathe in slowly, letting your body absorb the calm of continuity, the reassurance of human care, and the persistence of gentle attention. The world may change rapidly around you, but these rhythms endure, offering safety, belonging, and quiet confidence. As your thoughts settle, imagine the warmth of home, the soft hum of life, and the gentle presence of those who guide, protect, and include with patience and love. You are surrounded by a lineage of quiet dedication and understanding, stretching across centuries. Let that thought ease your mind and soften your thoughts. Feel yourself drifting into calm, carried by the steady heartbeat of inclusion and empathy. The story, like the day, winds gently to a close, leaving a soft, enduring warmth in its wake. Sweet dreams.